Welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. And joining me today is an organizational coach and strategist who believes that the secrets to business resilience have been hidden in plain sight for nearly 4 billion years. Our guest is Ines Garcia, the founder and CEO of Get Agile and the author of the new book, Nature's Blueprint for Business, Harnessing the Hidden Power of Edges. As both an agile coach and a climate coach, Ines helps businesses reduce waste and deliver better value by applying the principles to organizational design. And I'm super excited for this conversation. Ines, you've spent 6 months studying biomimicry. What was the most surprising thing you've learned about nature that's completely changed how you view organizational design for a business?
Well, one thing is difficult to choose one thing, but I think the essence that by default nature creates conditions that are conducive to life. And as much as we do try in organizations, that's often not our default.
Absolutely. And as you argue that magic happens at the edges, can you explain what edges are in a natural ecosystem and how that translates to innovation and growth within a corporate team?
Yeah, I mean, edges are potentially the outside limit of an object, an area, or a boundary. And organizations themselves don't have real boundaries. They have artificial ones. It's essentially a cognitive creation by us humans to help us to make sense of the diverse reality we live in. And one of the repercussions of those sort of defined cognitive boundaries or edges, like where a team starts or where a team ends, is sort of like the intrinsic notion of the separation between those elements and parties. And often when we look at the team structure on the elements, that's where our focus is on the components that sort of forms a whole. And we miss out of that magic that happens at the edges, the connections that comprise the spaces. The question is, how can we make those to be sustainable, be resilient, be regenerative, and be those things by default?
And many business books, Ines, give readers a step-by-step to-do list. You actually chose a really interesting, a different way of looking instead. Why is a shift in mindset more valuable for a leader than a ready-made solution?
Well, there isn't really a silver bullet, and I think embedded experience has another level of understanding concepts, right? Basically, there's two main reasons for the design of it. One is that context is everything, and the reader is going to be closer to the insights on that front, given the medium, right? And then the second one is this idea of that consuming content, especially in our really noisy world nowadays, and experiencing are two very different things. So being part of the journey and sort of hands-on, how it's been designed, it brings another layer of tangibility of how those concepts can be, in fact, application. And I think in any change, the hardest step is exactly that, the move for or crossing the chasm between theoretical agreement and then the tangible, impactful action. So my aim of how this has been designed is exactly moving the readers from urgency into actual agency.
And you've worked with everyone from 3-person startups to major utility companies, some big name organizations that all of our listeners are very familiar with. What is one specific pattern that you've observed that nature does brilliantly, but most businesses consistently miss?
Well, you'll be surprised that, whilst they are all very unique, regardless of size or industry, often organizations have similar conflicting, reoccurring constraints. And maybe it's worth mentioning to what I previously termed the external God complex. So unlike the standard sort of God complex, where someone believes in their own omniscience, those with an external God complex believe that the solution to all our problems exists out there. If only we could find it. Sort of common currencies allowed for and encourage the pooling and the flourishing of resources, ideas, experiences, given that the solution we are looking for has to work within our particular context. And it makes sense to believe that the answers also lie within that context. I think that's a very common pattern.
Mm-hmm. Instead of focusing on what is dying, your book focuses on what is thriving. How can a leader apply that shift in mindset to a struggling department or a team that feels stuck?
Yeah, I mean, I think the call here is for leaders to reflect how can we be creating a process which is energizing and generates beneficial intersection, even call it microclimates. How can the very structures and the members within be resilient to fluctuation? How can we respond after an injury or stress? And this, from nature perspective, has by default the ability to form and reorganize connections, especially in response to that learning or experiencing that stress. When our organizations often don't handle that very well, we go back to previous state rather than learning from that stress into the system. So imagine that we can create that flowing to interest by design, because the future is not to be predicted nor to be forecasted. It is first to be imagined so that it can, in fact, be created.
Mm-hmm. I'm chatting with Ines Garcia, the founder and CEO of Get Agile and the author of the new book, Nature's Blueprint for Business, Harnessing the Hidden Power of Edges. Ines, as an agile coach and as a climate coach, do you see sustainable business practices and organizational agility as competing priorities, or are they actually complementary?
Maybe if I can pick on semantics a little bit. Sustainability is the ability to sustain, and I think we need to go beyond mission zero, and be regenerative by design. So leaving the elements in a better state, that is flourishing. And agility and regeneration have many things in common, like increased predictability and reduce risk. And doing so by being, for example, locally attuned and responsive to changing conditions and being resourceful. So there isn't a waste in nature, ever evolving, not just to survive, but also to thrive. And just as an example, by achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, there are over 12 trillion up for grabs. So if, as our organization, our highest priority is continuous delivery of value, well, that's what is up for grabs. So time is now, really.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you mentioned that many business boundaries are cognitive creations. How can a company redesign these artificial boundaries by mimicking a natural system to improve collaboration?
Multiple different ways. Some of the principles or the design principles that I cover in the book is, for example, this gradual maximizing of form that allows regulation of focus of energy materials, which can be highly attuned to local and external factors. We often tap in existing tools such as hierarchies and org chart, and those things are from the 1800s and we haven't evolved them. So structure does really inform culture. So looking at form as part of the design for the function that you're after can make a big difference in terms of the connections, the convergence, and the flow of information across your organization.
Absolutely. Ines, in your book, you discuss how organizations can bend without breaking. What's one lesson from nature that can help a small business owner navigate the uncertainty of today's economy?
Well, exactly some of what we were covering earlier, this idea of how do we respond after an injury or stress. And if we think, for example, how water flows, having an irregular branched structure of fractal channels and connections containing more relationships between the elements at the edges with nested loops, especially this idea of how can we provide a reroute of flow upon over or underload. Like one of the questions to start for an organization will be, how do we handle underload and how do we perform on overload, and how can we help ourselves and our structure to do that better.
Ines, I want to make sure our listeners can find the book and get in touch with you. How can they do so?
Well, head over to www.inesgarcia.net.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Deeply inspirational, fascinating topic. We'll link in the show notes to make it easy for people to get in touch with you. We're going to squeeze in a quick break, some headlines, commercials. When we come back, a lot more small business jobs and entrepreneurship. If you don't want to touch that dial, we'll be right back.